Good evening, and welcome to the 2019 Colorado Mesa University Associated Student Government Debates, hosted by CMU-TV. My name is Chris DeLeon, Editor-in-Chief of the Criterion. With me is my co-moderator, Janine Hald. Tonight's fact-checker is Student Body Vice President and Chair of Election Committee, Jeff Vela. We have live audience tonight in the studio with us, in which we have asked to remain quiet throughout the duration of the debates.
Tonight's debates will cover candidates for the Office of Student Trustee, as well as President and Vice President. We will start with the trustee candidates, the format as follows. Each candidate will be asked a question and have a minute to answer. After their answer, every other candidate will have 1 minute to answer and reply to any points the first candidate talked about. When each candidate has answered, the first candidate to speak will have a 30-second rebuttal to reply to any points made.
The Office of Student Trustee is a powerful elected position in ASG that communicates directly with the Board of Trustees throughout the school year. The Board of Trustees are a governing body at CMU and provide ultimate oversight in different building projects, academic program approval, and course approval. The Student Trustee brings the voice of all students to this meeting so the trustees can make their final position. This position is a state-mandated position and can be seen as one of the most influential positions on campus.
It is now time to introduce our candidates for the Office of Student Trustee. Student Trustee Hobbs is seeking re-election to maintain her seat on the board and is running against ASG Justice Jasmine Teller, ASG Senate Leader Colton Ruppel, and Miss Olivia Van Gundy.
Trustee Hobbs, you have 1 minute to answer the following question. Besides representing students, what is the most important aspect of being a trustee? How would you use your soft powers to benefit all students?
Yes, so I think the most important aspect of being the student trustee is just making sure and understanding certain policies and concerns that happen within our legislative process. Having a professional development and relationships within our current administration and with the Board of Trustees is also huge, because I want to make sure that I can advocate for the students properly and that they can get their needs and concerns met. So there's a lot of involvement in media, which is huge. We really want to make sure that you are the voice of CMU. You're represented in every way, shape, or form, so it's very big that you are great at public speaking, and that you make sure that anybody in the community knows who you are and that you represent CMU incredibly well. And the last thing I would say is just having true passion for students and serving others is incredibly important, because this position is made for the students, and we need to make sure that there are people in here who really advocate for what's best for our students and best for CMU.
Ms. Van Gundy, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points that Trustee Hobbs spoke about.
Yeah, so I think Trustee Hobbs made an amazing point. I for sure think it's important to be updated on all the legislation so that you can properly sit on the Board of Trustees and know how you're best going to represent your students and how you're best going to get their points across and make sure that it is taken into effect. Along with the whole representing students, I am a firm believer in relationships. I think you should definitely have a strong relationship with your constituents, just so that you can properly represent them and know what is going on this campus, so that you can represent the Mavericks we have now, as well as the future Mavericks. So I just think that really developing relationships, being professional, and being passionate about what you're doing.
Justice Tellez, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points spoken about from the question. Besides representing students, what is the most important aspect of being a trustee? How would you use your soft powers to benefit all students?
So in addition to what everyone else has said, I think that it's really important to keep informed. I know that during the campaign, a lot of students didn't realize what a student trustee was, let alone what they did. So I think keeping informed is a great thing that we have to do, whoever gets elected. And I think that how we can do that is meeting with different clubs and organizations and making sure that we are answering any concerns that students have. And I would like to meet with these clubs and organizations at least once a month and or once a semester if I am elected.
Leader Rupel, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points spoken about from the question.
Like the other candidates were saying, the biggest job of the student trustee is to advocate for all the students. But the soft powers, you need to be working with relationships with the board of trustees, because all 9 voting members have have so much experience and knowledge throughout their time and career as a professional. And you just have to be able to work with those 9 individuals on when you meet with them, and then also working with the administration, with President Foster and then the high vice presidents, the vice presidents of the school. And you just have to be able to work with those individuals to express the students' concerns, because ultimately your job is to represent the students on any given matter, and that's the biggest job of the student trustee. Thank you.
Trustee Hobbs, you have 30 seconds to respond to any points talked about from the candidates.
In closing, I would just like to say, as a soft power in this position and currently being in this position, I think the biggest thing we need to look at when being the student trustee is just being kind and looking out for the students. You build those relationships with the trustees, so that's already there. I think really moving forward and finding different ways on how we best implement different programs on this campus, how will we make students successful, and how do we really make sure we get them to where they want to go is huge, because that's ultimately why the trustees are serving on this board.
Ms. Van Gundy, this next question is for you, and you have a minute to answer. As student trustee, real-world issues come up, and you have to present to the board on behalf of the students. An example of this was 2 years ago when President Trump repealed DACA. How do you approach the situation and present to the board so they can make a decision based off your report?
That's a great question. I was a senator during the time when the issue arose, and I was able to luckily meet students who were being affected, students who were advocating for DACA, and it was an amazing experience to see that point of view. I think in those situations, it's really about getting to know those students that are being affected, so that you can make it personal, because, I mean, we often hear this phrase, it's not personal, but when it comes down to our education, it is personal. These are real people, and it's for sure a personal thing. So I think it's just important to remember who your students are, getting to know them, and making sure that you know how to represent them to the Board of Trustees.
Thank you. Justice Tellis, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points Ms. Van Gundy talked about.
So when I was, when this DACA was being rescinded, I was actually the assistant coordinator of Latino Student Alliance. So it really hit home. I know a lot of people who have, who are DACA recipients. I think in a situation like this, it's really important to, one, get informed, to be as informed as possible. 2, go to whoever is directly affected, because these, and Van Gundy said this, these are real people, these are real situations. So talking to them and having that communication is really important. 3, I think after all that, it's also very important to take it to ASG, somehow get a approved resolution or proposal and send it to the Board of Trustees, because as student trustee, we can't do our job if we aren't listening to our students.
Leader Rupel, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points spoken about from the question. As student trustee, real issues will come up, and you have to present to the board on behalf of the students. An example of this was 2 years ago when President Trump repealed DACA. How do you approach this situation and present to the board so they can make a decision based off your research?
That's a very good question. So when DACA was repealed by President Trump, the trustee Flores, I think did an amazing job on how he proceeded with the process to present to the board. The Senate at the time made a committee focusing on DACA and on how to help support the students. And then I think the as student trustee, you listen to what the senators are doing, because those are great leaders on campus, and then you translate to asking the students that are affected by this, and you gather all the facts you can, and then also talk to the administration, because they're your ally in this instance, and you gotta be able to work with the administration on a constant basis, and then formulate a report to present to the student trustee or the trustees, and implement and suggest anything that the students want in that instance. Thank you.
Trustee Hobbs, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points spoken about from the question.
Thank you. So a lot of my fellow colleagues have said the same exact thing that I think I'm going to say, but if it was a specific population, I wanted to make sure that I got their input and understood their concerns or questions that they had, because ultimately they are the affected population that I need to be advocating for. So once I get all of that, I would then speak to the administration, whether that was Tim Foster or John Marshall, or even Derek Wagner, really, if it's governmental affairs, to sit down and talk about why is this happening and where do we move forward. And so on top of that, I would just make sure that we would propose a joint resolution with our associate student government. Our senators are huge and they help advocate for our constituents as well, so they should be a part of this. And then I would probably meet with Tim again just to make sure that everything was set in stone before I presented to the board. And then I would take all of that information and bring it to the Board of Trustees in a formal report, and probably invite some of those students who are being affected by that situation to make sure that their voices do need to be heard. So yes.
Ms. Van Gundy, you have 30 seconds to respond to any points talked about from the candidates.
So I actually wanted to touch back on something Tay has mentioned about how going out and campaigning, most people don't really know what student trustee is. And I agree with that completely. In my experience, most people don't know what associated student government is. So I think another big part of being student trustee, especially in a situation like this, is that you are still out there meeting your clubs just as hard as you would during the campaign process, and letting them know that if they are being affected by this, if they want their voice heard, that there are outlets for that.
Justice Tejas, you have 1 minute to answer and respond to the question. What accomplishments have you had on campus, and how does that translate to the trustee position?
So I've always loved being involved since the moment I got to CMU. I've made sure to be involved. I have been the assistant coordinator of Latino Student Alliance, as I mentioned before. I have also been the coordinator there. And I have been involved in other organizations, both here at CMU, but also outside of CMU, which I think is really important. An organization that I'm involved in outside is HAP, Hispanic Affairs Project. And I think it's really important, and this has helped me prepare to be student trustee, just because I've been talking to a lot of people, a lot of different people, networking, and networking is really important just because you have the right resources to help whoever needs the help or answer whatever questions need to be answered.
Leader Rupel, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points that Justice Tejas spoke about.
Could you repeat the question one more time?
Yes, the question is, what accomplishments have you had on campus, and how does that translate to the trustee position?
The accomplishments I've had over the past 2 years have helped me grow as a leader. My freshman year, I joined ASG the first week of freshman during FYI week, and throughout the whole year, I worked with my fellow colleagues and changed the whole bylaws and constitution during my freshman year. And then that year also, I was a part of the RHC of Grand Mesa, where I got to put on events for my residence hall, and it really showed me what a true leader needs to do when you are the president of an organization, and what you need to do to work with others. Then this year, I was elected to be that large senator for the Associate Student Government, and then I was elected by my peers to represent them as their leader, to lead the 25 senators, and
you are out of time. Trustee Hobbs, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points spoken about from the question. What accomplishments have you had on campus, and how does that translate to the trustee position?
Perfect, thank you. So as a student trustee, I really want to talk about the accomplishments that I've made this year and the opportunities that I've been able to gain. So throughout this position, I've built a lot of strong relationships with the Board of Trustees themselves and the administration, and I think that has been huge in being able to advocate for students and sit down and really talk about what are we doing? How do we better implement CMU throughout the community? And with that, I've been engaging with different community members as well and different legislators to really make sure that CMU is well represented across the state of Colorado. I've built a strong rapport with local media, having interviews with KKCO News multiple times. The gubernatorial debate, which we brought on campus, was huge, and I was really happy to be a part of that with our current governor, who just got elected. And overall, I feel like I've really accurately represented our students to the board, because students are always my priority. I've been speaking at the Donors and Scholars event. I got to speak at the December 2018 commencement, which was really awesome and a great opportunity. And
Trustee Hobbs,
oh yes,
you are out of time.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Van Gundy, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points spoken about from the question.
So since coming on campus here at CMU, I joined Alpha Sigma Alpha, which was the first sorority on campus, and that has been the most amazing growing experience. And I'm now in my second term as Vice President of Public Relations and Recruitment. I was also a senator last year for the Literature, Language, and Mass Communication seat, which really kind of started my love for the student government. And I think just being in those positions, being with different Mavericks all around campus rather than sticking to one group, really helped me to kind of start to see problems that our Mavericks are facing. And so that really kind of spurred me wanting to run for student trustee, because I've heard some of these issues and I want to ask these questions as to why our Mavericks are having these issues.
Justice Tejas, you have 30 seconds to respond to any points talked about from the candidates.
So in general, again, it's really important for me. What I have been involved in has been really important to me. These leadership roles have taught me a lot, and I am definitely ready to continue and get more experience. I also think that being a student trustee would allow me to talk to as many students and kind of help guide those next leaders, and hopefully so that they could eventually fill our shoes.
Leader Ruppel, for the last question, you have a minute to talk about the following. Governor Polis recently rescinded 2 of former Governor Hickenlooper's nominations, which were 2 highly qualified Republican trustees. Governor Polis appointed a Democrat and unaffiliated trustee to the board. What are your thoughts on this, and do you think this was the right decision for the governor to make?
To my knowledge, that's the governor's power to appoint members to the board of trustees. If he deemed fit that those 2 trustees would better serve and the core values of CMU for the future growth and enhancement of the students, then because they bring different knowledges than the previous trustees that were appointed, then the governor has the full right to do that, and it's checked by the Senate of Colorado. So they have the option to block that if they believe they were not the right fit, but if both agreed and appointed the 2 trustee candidates, Ms. McLeod and Ms. Lentz, then they must be very qualified to be on the board of trustees with their fellow peers.
Trustee Hobbs, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points that Leader Ruppel spoke about.
Perfect. So respectfully, I believe that Governor Polis made his own decision in what he thought was going to be best for this university. And so I met the 2 appointees in our January meeting as the current student trustee, Sonia Gutierrez and John Anderson, who were rescinded. And I thought they were great candidates. I thought they brought a lot to the table. I think a lot of this has to do with party affiliation, and that's just politics. However, this university is really accepting of our new trustees. We've brought them in and showed them around our campus and given them a lot of opportunity to see who we are and what we're about. We're excited to have them. And so as a public institution, my personal experience with the trustees has been really great. I know that they're here to serve the students, and they're going to serve the students well. And I think and believe that the governor would place people in here who would do great things. So.
Ms. Van Gundy, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points spoken about of the question on what your thoughts are, and do you think it was right decision for the Governor Polis to rescind 2 of Governor Hickenlooper's trustees?
Just like my fellow candidates, I too believe that that was in the power of Governor Polis. And from what I've read about Governor Polis and what's going on with the Higher Learning Commission, I firmly believe that Polis is very passionate about higher learning, and he's going to do what he sees best for the universities around the state. And so I definitely believe that this was a good decision and that we should welcome them as much as possible.
Justice Tejas, you have a minute to answer and respond to any points spoken about from the question.
So, if I'm elected as student trustee, I am more than happy to work with the current Board of Trustees because that's my job, and I think that anyone who is professional should be able to work with their coworkers. I do think that it's really interesting that even though he removed 2 Republicans, he did put 2 other candidates who had a lot of similarities to the previous ones. He brought someone who's from outside of Grand Junction, and he brought someone who's from Grand Junction. So giving us those different perspectives is really important because they're making decisions that should involve a lot of different perspectives because we, as a school, all have different backgrounds.
Leader Rupel, you have 30 seconds to respond to any points talked about from the candidates.
I believe that, like my fellow candidates, that whatever the Governor Polis deems fit for the best represent student or CMU is ultimately up to him, and that no matter what, the student trustee, or if any of us is elected student trustee, will work with and welcome whoever those board trustees are. And I'd be honored to work with all those 9 individuals because they bring so much experience and so much knowledge from different aspects of their careers, and I'd be honored to work with them.
Thank you. That will conclude this portion of tonight's debates. At this time, I would invite the audience members to give a round of applause to the candidates as we get ready to go to commercial break. Up next is our presidential and vice presidential debates. Voting for this year's election will take place from Monday, April 8th to Tuesday, April 9th. Students can vote various ways on and off campus. Voting polls will be on the first floor of the University Center on Monday and Tuesday. Students can also vote online through the OrgSync student portal anytime throughout the Monday or Tuesday. Voting for student leaders is an extremely important aspect of being a CMU student. The winners of this election will be posted on Tuesday, April 9th at 5 p.m.
Debates. The office of Student Body President and Vice President is the highest elected office any student can achieve at CMU and is respected by their peers in the school administration. This office is the direct line to the school administration to represent all student matters to Vice President John Marshall and President Tim Foster. A president and vice president ticket is a team that must work together well on all issues and which leads to tonight's format. Each candidate will be asked 2 questions directly and have 1 minute to answer. After that minute, the other presidential candidates will have 2 minutes to respond, followed by 1 minute rebuttal by the first running pair.
It is now time to introduce you to the candidates for the 2019 elections. President Bo Flores is seeking re-election with a new running mate, Mr. Angel Batista. Graduate Senator Lauren Mason has chosen Theater Senator Alex Wagner as her running mate, challenging the incumbent president. At this time, will the studio audience welcome the candidates?
Senator Wagner, the first question is for you. Since the start of your campaign, you have put much focus on the idea of community. What exactly do you mean when you talk about creating a better community at CMU, and how will you accomplish this?
Thank you so much. So a few of the things that we've talked about a lot for creating a better community is, the first thing is just kind of removing the intimidation out of getting involved. I'm an RA on campus currently, and there's such an interest in every student to find their family on campus and to find that group that they're really going to get inspired with, and that is going to give them the experience they need to grow. But the biggest difficulty is them finding access into that group and not being intimidated and getting involved. So we're hoping to possibly consider a different online platform than OrgSync, or do something to make it more approachable for organizations so that people don't feel quite as off-put by the organizations that we already do have. We also are trying to foster better relationships with the small businesses in our community. We have so many amazing small businesses and so many amazing opportunities that are just at our fingertips. So we're hoping to just make those more accessible and facilitate those relationships with CMU and those small businesses so that we can make those opportunities more available to our Mavericks.
President Flores and Mr. Batista, you have 2 minutes to respond and answer any points to the question.
So the biggest thing that we want to really touch on is that community is one of the main focuses we want to really focus on for our campaign. And a little bit of background about myself: I've been coaching youth sports in this community for the past 7 years. I've been head coach for youth football at the middle school down the road for the past 2 years. I've been coaching for so long, and it's just amazing to see how these kids in the community are really growing. Those kids I started with are now in high school, getting ready to graduate. And the biggest thing I want to focus on, like they already mentioned, was community. But the best way to really enhance CMU is really focusing on those kids that are juniors and seniors right now in the high schools right down the road. We plant that seed when they're 7, 8, 9 years old and tell them CMU is the best school for you because you have the best opportunity to really come here, find yourself with your family, and really being able to really excel. And 2 things happen with that. 1, we retain our talent and knowledge here in town. And when we have that, CMU is just going to exponentially grow here for the community. And the second thing is, once we retain that knowledge, our graduation rates are going to skyrocket immediately. So I think for community, we really need to focus on external communications, because we already have partnerships with small businesses. We already have those smart deals, or those catalogs always come out with $420 savings for students. That's already there. Something that hasn't been done is really focusing on those 5th graders, 6th graders, telling them you can come here, you can make a difference here at CMU, because this school, they grow up seeing this school growing up from Mesa State College to CMU. And that's the biggest thing that I feel like we really need to touch on.
Senators Mason and Wagner, you have a minute to respond.
Awesome, thank you so much. I just want to touch on what Mr. Batista said. We definitely have a great recruiting program, I think personally right now, and it always can grow and be better at CMU, and I definitely want to advocate for that. But I think right now, I think we should focus on our students here and our students' educations as they are here at CMU, because they are current Mavericks, and we have so many students who are still seeking those opportunities and those connections with small businesses, whether it's through a discount magazine or whether it's through an internship. And I think that there is a disconnect between CMU and the local community, and we want to kind of help bridge that It's been successful for me. I am currently working at a small business in CMU, and I see that as a need for other students, and I want to help other students get to that place.
Mr. Batista, there have been some questions raised about your ability to act as an ASG Vice President. Those questions stem from your current lack of experience within the student government. Experience some may feel is necessary to properly serve as leadership, which is one of your 5 listed principles. What qualifies you to lead and push the rest of your principles, including community and involvement?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that's always come across when people talk to me saying that I have no ASG experience. And I completely agree with that. The most experience I have is being on the presidential cabinet. But something that I really want to focus on and explain is that a leader is a leader no matter where you are. You could be a captain on a football team, captain for the swim team. You could be a captain for a Knowledge Bowl. You can be a captain and wherever you want to go. You can be president of student council in high school. Wherever you're at, you're learning how to be a leader. Those characteristics and attributes you learn through communication, persistency, tenacity, those things are universal tactics that you harness within your own self. I feel like that cannot be diminished just by a single title of vice president. If you're a leader, you're a leader. I truly believe that leaders are not born, they're made. I feel like with the experiences I have through coaching, through athletics, through mentoring and tutoring in the community, through Riverside Educational Center and through the Utica Science Museum, I feel like I've really harnessed the ability to really lead.
Senator Mason and Wagner, you have 2 minutes to respond and answer any points to the question.
Thank you so much. So I couldn't agree more with a lot of the points that Mr. Bautista made, and I think that if you are a leader, you are a leader, and you definitely gain that leadership through the experiences that you have. I personally joined ASG specifically because I was looking for a leadership opportunity on campus, and it definitely has helped me grow into that position, and I don't think that we should deny anyone the opportunity to get involved just because it's later on in their career. I think that Lauren and I both have really good experience in leadership on campus through being RAs on campus and various other experiences that we've had. And I would just say that whether or not you're experienced in ASG, it can be relevant depending on the responsibilities, but even me who has had a year sitting on that seat, like I would ask the current Vice President Jeff Vela about it, and he says that you don't really know the job until you're in the job, and I think it's just one of the things is you need the opportunity to be involved before you can actually start growing into that position.
Along with that point, I just want to reiterate that Alex and I do have that knowledge of ASG, which I think does make us good candidates for these positions, but it doesn't diminish Mr. Batista's lack of knowledge or ability to lead. I think, as Alex had said, that when you are a leader, you just need to get out there and find people that are your people. And right now, like we've been doing that as current senators, and we just want to find a way to kind of take the next step and find it as the rest of CMU students.
And just to wrap up again, because of the opportunities that we've been granted here on campus, we've been able to grow into stronger leaders, and I think it's important that we bring that opportunity to even more Mavericks as much as possible.
President Flores and Mr. Batista, you have a minute to respond.
Okay, so I think I'll speak on behalf of Angel. I think he spoke enough my first time speaking. Thank you for the moderators for volunteering, and thank you for CMU-TV for doing this and really helping us get out there. So to continue back to the question, I think experience is important. We all know Angel did say that he's a leader, but if we look at the actual position that Angel was in, he was actually in the presidential cabinet, which is a part of ASG. So Angel basically has the same amount of experience than Senator Wagner does. For a year, he's been here, if not longer, for the presidential cabinet where they serve to advise me. So in terms of experience, that's not even a question. He's been in ASG since August, and that's pretty straightforward, I think. And I think people have to understand that the presidential cabinet with all the org leaders is a part of ASG. So in all reality, Angel is qualified with experience.
For our next question, Senator Mason, what leadership qualities do you feel that you could bring to the position that no other president has before?
Thank you so much. Touching back on what we have said before, I have various leadership roles currently on campus. I have been an RA for the past 2 years. I've been in student government as 2 different types of senators for the past 2 years. and I've been in various clubs as well. And I'm also a double major. So I've reached a lot of people on campus, and I've seen a lot of diverse groups through my leadership roles. And I've just seen a need on campus for someone who's going to ask those tough questions and someone who's going to raise the concerns of the students. And I believe I can do that based off of my experience and my leadership that I currently have had.
President Flores and Mr. Bautista, you have 2 minutes to respond and answer any points to the question.
Do you mind restating that question, please?
Of course. What leadership qualities do you feel you could bring to the position that no other president has?
Well, I think I'm the current student body president, so I think what I could bring is what I brought, and that's definitely something what people can say is, I guess, bold, I guess you could say. I like to get things done. I'm very straightforward. I am a leader that likes to kind of be on a one-on-one when it comes to emotional and a very sentimental side, but I think if people who work for me, my presidential executives who are here, I am very straightforward, and sometimes it can be kind of harsh, but it does, I believe, we're all kind of like that inside and we get stuff done, so.
Just to add on what Mr. Flores just added on to that, something that I feel like that I could bring to this table is that I'm coming straight out of the student body population as of right now. I know the exact issues and the exact problems that we're dealing with in 2019 as students. I feel like ASG really focuses on students, which is an amazing thing, but at the same time, we're focusing on issues that happened in 2016, 2017, or even 2018 from this past semester. ASG needs to continue to keep evolving with the students. If we fail to evolve, then we're failing as ASG representatives for representing the community and CMU. And that's something that I feel like I bring to the table. I feel like my lack of experience or small experience in ASG is honestly one of the great attributes that I have. I bring all the students on my back and I'm able to represent them as, hey, you can do this too. Just because I'm here doesn't mean you can't be here next year as well.
Senators Mesa and Wagner, you have a minute to respond.
Just to close out, I wanted to touch on a point that President Flores had made, talking about his boldness in ASG. He is definitely, as a current senator, I see that day to day, but I would say I'm one of his biggest advocates against whatever he's going for, and I think that's my strongest ability right now, is I'm not afraid to go against, the current president. I'm not afraid to go against everybody who's working against me, because I know what my constituents have said and what the people that I've talked to believe in, and I will be that voice to stand up for them. And I think because I have done that this year, I think I can even further that next year with more ability to kind of just reach more students, and that's my goal as president next year.
To continue on that and just kind of add on to Lauren speaking about herself, she does a really good job of not being afraid to question the status quo. And we have a Senator Garcia, who currently sits on ASG, who always says that if tradition is the reason that you're doing something, you shouldn't keep doing it. And I think that Lauren really embodies that.
You are out of time.
Thank you.
President Flores, you have signed 9 executive orders this year. It is the Senate's job to legislate, to write and approve bills, while it is the President's job to serve as an overseer. The President does have the power to veto bills or create executive orders. However, this many executive orders in a single school year could be construed as executive overreach. How do you justify the volume of executive orders you have created?
Oh, good question, Chris. Executive orders I definitely don't think it's an overreach. I do think that it is the ability and the power granted to the president with our Constitution and our bylaws. So I guess more in depth, it's more of what are the reasons for an executive order. And for me anyway, 9, it does seem kind of a lot, but I do have 2 mandatory kind of criteria for executive orders. Is timely matter. If something needs to be done relatively soon, an executive order does that, or it's a matter of importance. So I guess I can go on in my rebuttal, but with those 2 also, it is also questioned and brought up with advice through the executive branch as well as the presidential cabinet. So these executive orders are not done solely on me. It is done with a body.
Senator Mason and Wagner, you have 2 minutes to respond and answer any points to the question.
Thank you. So I'll start with this one. I would like to respond and say that a lot of the executive orders that President Flores has made this year are definitely beneficial to the student body, and I think that the impact that they've made can already be seen right away. I would say that a lot of them are based on legislation that senators started to put into motion, and rather than bringing to the point of completion, President Flores would kind of push them onto executive orders and then make them happen that way, which definitely isn't wrong, but I think that more power could have been given to the Senate in that process and just empowering them to make their own legislation that way.
Yeah, and just to kind of touch on that point as well, I don't think that the executive orders are wrong. They're definitely beneficial to all the students, and they have really outreached a lot of other executive orders or administrations in the past. However, I do, and as we have talked about, next year we want to work on really empowering the Senate and showing them how to make their own legislation and drive them rather than stepping in with an executive order. However, as to President Flores' point, it is up to a timely matter, and I completely understand that, and will respect those as we move forward. But I do think that that is something that we are very passionate about, is creating that community of the Senate that can make these decisions for themselves, so it's not always pushed onto the president.
President Flores and Mr. Batista, you have a minute to respond.
So, in response to what Senator Mason and Wagner has said, I think it's time to defend the executive orders that I have created. And I do think that when it comes to saying that the Senate, it starts in the Senate and then I end up finishing it, in reality, and this is through, if you guys would like to fact check, this is through the minutes, I will bring up something and then I would wait 2 to 3 weeks. And if nothing has been done, I would sign an executive order. It is something that needs to be done, and if I don't see it done, then I will with some advice, and I'll get it done. And in fact, so preparing the Senate, there is countless. We prepared this statement when the senators wrote a resolution on the executive branch of all the times that I have said with the executive members of preparing you guys. This is what you need to do. So using that as an argument now is honestly, it's really invalid. There's minutes that state that.
Mr. Batista, your 5 key principles include community and athletics. It is easy to see how you will create a community with the athletes given your history on the track and field team. However, how do you plan to include student groups outside of athletes, such as those involved in the arts, in your community, seeing as you have less experience and connections in those areas?
All right, that's a great question, absolutely. And something that I feel like is always brought to me is that you only have one layer, you're only an athlete. Something I feel like that I'm defined as is like an onion. You may see the layer of athlete at the very top, but as you keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper, you find out that there's more to this person as opposed to just, oh, he's an athlete. I would just want to diminish that right now. I'm not just an athlete. I'm also a student at CMU. I'm also a part of Greek life. I've been a president for Delta Sigma Phi fraternity. And something that needs to happen is that we need to seek to understand, to really hear all the voices. If you start saying, oh, they're in theater arts, they're business, they're athletes, you're segregating them just by a title. Just by listening and just seeking to understand before speaking is something that really needs to be done in the position of Vice President.
Senators Mesa and Wagner, you have 2 minutes to respond and answer any points to the question.
Awesome. So this is also a really good question, and I think something that Lauren and I really can bring to these positions is just the diversity of experiences and the number of different groups of students that we've interacted with. I currently am a business administration student with a concentration in entrepreneurship, but my background and the Senate seat that I hold currently is theater arts. So I have a really strong connection with that community, and as Lauren mentioned earlier, she's double majoring and is also holding a different seat in the Senate than her double major. So we have, just in those areas and not even in our personal relationships, we've established a really diverse connection with a bunch of different groups of students. So I think that's something that we can bring. And I think that that's what will help us make a better community here at CMU.
Awesome, those are great points. I also have always said that I have a passion for people, and that doesn't mean that I label them during their major or their activities that they do outside. I love them as like just hearing what they have to say, and that's something that I want to bring to this position is just hearing face value what they have to say, whether I agree with it or don't. I believe in just a well-rounded outlook on life and seeing how I can best support every student out there, no matter their affiliation.
President Flores and Mr. Batista, you have a minute to respond.
Both of you brought up very good points, and being RAs, you have the ability to really talk to all students, which is amazing. It's an amazing opportunity. But currently I hold an internship at the Eureka Science Museum on campus. It's right next to Confluence Hall. And in the internship, you don't need to be an educational major. I'm a business major myself, but in that internship, I've met so many criminal justice, theater arts, math, English, so many different people that really represent all of CMU. And I feel like just because I'm not an RA doesn't mean that I can't represent students at all. The first thing is, like I mentioned before, you need to really seek out and understand where they're coming from each department. And it just takes one walk to department head and really talk, hey, let me talk to your students, let me talk to some students that's having some concerns. And just really putting a face to the issues, like, I'm not being represented. Well, you have a voice on campus and you need to be represented. And I feel like that's what we can do on campus here.
Senator Wagner, your page, Mason Wagner 2020, says you hope to cement a strong sense of community both on campus and the Grand Junction area. Earlier this year, however, you spoke against ASG donating money to support victims of sexual assault and domestic violence within the community. You said, "I also think it is not our responsibility to represent what the students want this to go to." You are also the only senator to vote against the money going to support victims within the community. How do you support your claimed desire of a strong sense of community when it contrasts from your voting record?
Thank you so much, Chris, for bringing this up. It's actually something that I was hoping to address. So it is true that I voted against the bill for the Men in Heels race, which was a donation of $2,000 to an organization which does amazing work for victims of sexual abuse and assault. And that's actually something that holds a really close place in my heart. So it's not that I was against the actual victims or the organization as a whole. It just so happened that that meeting was one of the ones that was closer to the beginning of the year, and that issue was brought up without my knowledge, and so I wasn't able to talk to my constituents previous to that vote. I did not feel comfortable with the amount of $2,000, especially because President Flores and Vice President Vela had run on the platform of transparency and fiscal responsibility. I just felt that $2,000 was a really large sum of money to donate to something that didn't actually directly benefit students. There were a couple other environmental things that came up on this floor, and sorry, I ran out of time.
President Flores and Mr. Batista, you have 2 minutes to respond and answer any points to the question.
So as I mentioned earlier, I'm from Grand Junction, Colorado, and I hold this place very close and dear to my heart because it's given me so many opportunities to really thrive and meet people here on campus. But at the same time, the Latimer House has been something that they've always been holding on events for people in the community. And something that's really this town takes pride in it, because seeing men race in heels is something that you don't see every single day. And seeing them run down in heels, bigger men, small men, doesn't matter who you are. You're standing up and you're representing all of Grand Junction together. And if I was a senator, I'd love to vote on that, because you don't know what students are going through on campus. Some students may have that one layer deep down inside their onion where they went through sexual abuse or sexual assault on campus. And if you deny that money, you're not representing the students completely. And that just comes back down to really seeking and understanding. I know it's a hard issue to talk about, but you have to keep in mind that there are those outliers, or there are those people who are going through those things on campus.
Senator Mason and Wagner, you have a minute to respond.
All right, I just wanted to say that I did vote yes on this bill, but I think that Senator Wagner voting no shows our strengths of we're able to say no, we're able to show that what we believe in. I think that I felt that at this time the money was a good donation to the Latimer House, and I think that has been well received. But it was a large lump sum of money, and right now we're struggling to find money in some funds and some budgets. So I think that it is good to be critical, especially when you're trying to be fiscally responsible. And so I think that the fact that she voted no as an informed voter isn't because she was against the cause, but rather because she was trying to show her constituents that she's standing up for them, and that she wants to advocate for them. And it's all a matter of trying to figure out, as a senator, who you're trying to reach and who you're trying to benefit. And so I think that is kind of where we stand, and we want to be able to make sure that we outreach to everybody and reach everyone in our campaign.
President Flores, If you're elected for another term, what do you hope to do that you have not done yet, and why have you been unable to accomplish it or work on it this year?
Okay, good question. I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, everything that we've done as an executive branch and ASG, everything that I hoped that me and Jeff ran off of, all those goals and projects has been done. There's nothing that this year that I've left out that I wasn't pushing for or that we had. And that's one thing that I can speak out to a lot of the executive branch members in the presidential cabinet is that with the help of President and Jeff and everybody, we actually got things done. And that's one thing that I think needs to kind of be brought to light. And I can continue the rebuttal. I don't have much time. But in terms of what I'll do next, there is a few projects that I had in mind.
Senators Mason and Wagner, you have 2 minutes to respond and answer any points to the question.
Awesome, thank you. I do think that this past administration has done really well at doing a lot of good for our community and especially for our satellite campuses. But I do think that there was a lack of responsibility here on our main campus. And not to diminish any work that they've done this past year, they've done a wonderful job, and I hope to continue that. But I want to just take it that step further and really get all of our students involved and really connect all of us into one CMU and into one Mavli.
President Flores and Mr. Batista, you have a minute to respond.
I think lack of responsibility on the main campus is, I think Jeff and I ran off of helping out the other campuses that were definitely not represented. So I think that under this administration, we have definitely taken them into account. So that, I think, saying the lack of responsibility here is definitely kind of outshines the other campuses. But there are some projects that Angel and I are actually looking forward to. We've actually got done, I don't know if any athletes in here, but there are no water fountains in the downstairs athletic weight room, and it is hard when you're trying to work out and you have no water. 2 is that there is an extra space in the pharmacy where we thought of, and then we couldn't do it, and then now yesterday we were okay to move that. So we're kind of thinking of moving some ASG offices there so that more senators have offices instead of just kind of sharing one. So that's a couple that we have.
Senator Mason, your page, Mason Wagner 2020, says, and I quote, "For many years, ASG has flown under the radar, acting only as a fiscal body and not providing the campus with the representation that it deserves. As senators this year, you and Senator Wagner had the opportunity to drive legislation and avoid being seen as nothing more than a fiscal body. Yet, Senator Wagner sponsored only fiscal bills and no legislation. You sponsored 7 fiscal bills and only 1 legislative bill that was actually written by Senator Colton Ruppel. If your ticket failed to drive legislation and true representation as senators, how will you do it as executives?"
Thank you. That was a really good question and something that I did want to address as well. I think that there is a culture of community in student government, and in my strongest ability as a senator is my voice. And as President Flores had spoke earlier, he has done a lot of drive himself for legislation. I was on the other end of that legislation advocating against it. And I think that is kind of where my strengths lie as far as what I've done this year. I am a complete advocate for my clubs and students, which is why I sponsored a lot of fiscal bills. But in the Senate and in the General Assembly meetings, I was a huge advocate for my constituents and the legislation against the legislation that Bo was running, which is a job within itself because he is a very strong voice there.
President Flores and Mr. Batista, you have 2 minutes to respond and answer any points to the question.
I know that was a long question, Chris. Do you mind? Is that going to cut into the time?
I can refrain.
Okay. The question was 2 minutes.
Okay, the question goes, Senator Mason, your page, Mason Wagner 2020, says, and I quote, "For many years, ASG has flown under the radar, acting only as a fiscal body and not providing this campus with the representation that it deserves. As senators this year, you and Senator Wagner had the opportunity to drive legislation and avoid being seen as nothing more than a fiscal body. Yet, Senator Wagner sponsored only fiscal bills and no legislation. You sponsored 7 fiscal bills and only 1 legislative bill that was actually written by Senate Leader Colton Ruppel. If your ticket failed to drive legislation and true representation as senators, how will you do it as executives?
I think that question and the answers that Senator Mason has stated reflects the first on the executive order question of why the executive order was needed in the first place. It's when you see that there is, I guess, room for legislation and it's only sponsoring fiscal bills and the power of actually making law is within the Senate, then executive orders is needed, and that's where I come in there. But I also want to make it clear that it is also a team effort when it comes to ASG. I know a lot of people say that, oh, Bo did this, Senate did that, and that, whatever, but it is ultimately a joint kind of project. I will not be able to do half the things that I have done without the Senate and vice versa. So I think we have to understand that although there is some kind of, I guess, feud going on between the two branches, that it's definitely working together, and together we have produced a lot more than other administrations.
Senator Mason and Wagner, you have a minute to respond.
Thank you. I just wanted to address the second half of that question, is how will we do it as executives? And something that I really saw 2 years ago in my position as senator underneath the Lindsey Gile administration was the ability for both of those executives to empower the Senate to do it. Not that Bo has not empowered us, but he took the reins, or he tried to give the reins to us. But we are all students, we all are learning. This year there was a lot of new senators, and there is a learning curve to this job. So I want to bring the experience that both of us have and empower the Senate to make these bills and to help drive legislation and get the representation that CMU deserves.
And to add on to that, I would like to say that one of the closest issues that I tried to bring up was the refurbishing of Moss Performing Arts Center, and I actually started some of the process of that, and I talked to Bo and a couple other people about moving forward with that, and I was not given very much guidance on where I was supposed to go, but we have tried.
That concludes tonight's debates. Thank you for tuning in, and special thanks to CMU-TV for hosting the debates.
Voting will start on Monday, April 8th, and end the 9th at 5 p.m. Ballots will be made available through OrgSync. Even though it may seem unsubstantial, practice your civil duty and vote. Thank you for tuning in, and have a good night, Mavericks.